mentioned, Nehemiah has been given the task of rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem. He has gathered many others, and they are laboring together. This is a very key word here because you're going to find all throughout these first, I'd say, chapters 4, 5, 6. We're going to go through some this evening. You're going to find the fact that they were together was a big part of how and why God was able to do so much through them. And so they are laboring together. In fact, chapter number 3, if you start in verse number 1 of chapter 3, he actually starts listing people and what they built and what they were responsible for and how they labored. And then all the way through, if you get to verse number 7, and next unto him, verse 8, next unto him, verse 9, next unto him, verse 10, next unto him. All of chapter 3 is this list of people who are laboring, working together for the cause of Christ and for the cause of rebuilding the walls of this city and getting God's people back together. And so there's a great cause, a great work that is there. When we come to chapter number 4, and there are some enemies that arise because they do not like the work that is being done. In chapter 4, in verse number 1, it says, "It came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth." They're not happy with it. They're angry with the progress. They're angry with what is taking place. We defeated that city, and now you're rebuilding it. It seems like they are losing ground. It seems like they're going backwards. He was wroth and took great indignation, and he mocked the Jews, we're told at the end of verse number 1. Verse 2, he spake before his brethren in the army of Samaria and said, "What do these feeble Jews do?" They're mocking the people. "And will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burnt?" A lot of sarcasm. Verse 3, now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, so now somebody else starts jumping in and adding their own criticism and adding their own sarcasm. He steps up and he says, "Even that which they build, if a fox were to go up, he shall even break down their stone wall." So there's enemies that start to creep up because they don't like what is taking place and they don't like the work of the Lord that's being done. But thank the Lord for verse number 6 of chapter 4, because it says, "So built we the wall, and all the wall was joined together, and the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work." Thank the Lord the distraction of the enemy didn't stop them from doing the job. They stayed focused, they stayed involved, and they kept their minds at what God had called them to do, and they were able to be successful. Well, I think we would all agree, if we don't allow the distractions of the world to get to us, we're able to accomplish a lot more of the things of God. And so we know that there were some enemies that came. And when the wall was actually becoming a success, we see that in verse 6. They had a mind to work, they're staying busy, and things are getting done. When they actually became a success at what they were accomplishing, what they were striving to accomplish, we notice in verse number 7 and 8 of chapter 4, they get more angry. But it came to pass in verse 7 that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem, here's what's interesting, it starts off with one, then somebody else added. Now we're already to verse number 7, and we have whole groups of people. And so they're starting to talk, and the word is starting to spread. Have you heard what the Israelites are doing? Did you hear what the Jews are doing? Did you hear what's happening down in Jerusalem? They're starting to rebuild that. No doubt the mocking went on and the laughing, and that'll never work. It'll never happen. Well, verse 6 comes along, and it was happening. And so now they get angry in verse number 7. All these people, it says at the end of verse number 7, it says, they heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and that the breaches began to be stopped. Then they were very wroth. They did not like what was happening. They were very angry. In verse 8, look at what they did, and conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. Let's go stop them. I mean, it was one thing. We didn't think they'd get this far. We laughed, we called them feeble, we insulted them, we mocked them, we did all these things. But now they have gone too far, and we need to rally together, and we need to put an end to this. And so they start conspiring to put together distractions to hinder the work of God. Message number 1 of tonight. It's interesting, it's hard to think of one introduction that fits 3 messages, but this is where we are. Message 1, 4 plans of the enemy to get you to quit. 4 plans of the enemy to get you to quit. I was told this week that my points are way too long, so I added a couple words to them for tonight. Actually, that had nothing to do with it. 4 plans of the enemy to get you to quit. By the way, the enemy does want us to quit. The enemy doesn't like the work of the Lord. It doesn't like what is happening. So 4 plans of the enemy to get you to quit. Plan number 1, you ready? This is a plan of the enemy according to what happened in Nehemiah. Plan number 1 is mock them into quitting. Mock them. We saw that in verse number 1, 2, and 3 in chapter number 4, where they start saying, there's feeble Jews. What are they going to do? They're not strong enough. They don't have the ability. They don't have the finances. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the experience. Whatever it may be, if they're not good enough, they're not qualified, there's no way it's going to happen. You're not going to make it. It's not going to work. All of these things, they start mocking them. Will they fortify themselves? Are they going to do this on their own? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Are they going to, I wonder if they'll make it till the day ends. I wonder if they'll quit before sunset. I mean, all the mocking that takes place, he says, they go on and will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish? Look at what they have to work with. Well, I think a lot of people could look at church people and say, look what they have to work with. What good are they? They have broken homes. They have broken lives. They have bad experiences. They have things in their past that nobody looks. What good are those people? Well, thank God we have a God that does pretty good with rubbish. And he takes that and they looked and said, look what you have to work with, and what finances do you have, and what ability do you have, and what talents do you have? I doubt you'll make it till the day. You're going to quit. It'll get too hard. You'll give up. And they try to mock them into quitting. That was the first. That's point number 1 of message 1. Well, how did they respond? Well, they responded with unity in verse number 6. They responded to the mocking and says, so built we the wall. That didn't work. It didn't get to them. And thank God it didn't get to them. They were able to keep going. The enemy had a plan. Let's mock them. That'll get them. That'll get them to quit. But it didn't work. And they were able to keep going. Plan number 2. Fear them into quitting. Fear them into quitting. Look what happens in verse number 11 of chapter 4. We heard in verse number 8, they conspired to come against them. Well, then look how they did this in verse number 11. It's quite a sneaky plan. And our adversary said, they shall not know, neither see, till we come in the midst among them and slay them and cause the work to cease. And it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came, they said unto us 10 times, from all the places which ye shall return unto us, they will be upon you. So here's what happened. They start these rumors about themselves. We're going to go in. They'll never know. They'll not see us. We'll sneak in. And by the time they do see us, we'll be in there and we'll be amongst them. And they will be afraid and they will die. There's nothing they can do because we will sneak in. Well, they said this around some of the other Jews who heard their plan. If you think that was by accident. And so what happens? Over 10 times, the Jews who are scared are coming into the ones working saying, they're going to come in. I heard them say it. They're putting together a plan. They're going to come and shut it down. They're going to come and attack us. They're going to sneak in here. By the way, they never did up to this point ever come in and attack what was taking place. But out of you could say out of anticipation, you could say out of fear, they put some things in place and they put some people with swords and some people with spears, but they never quit working. The point is this, the devil and the enemy tried to fear them into quitting. It's one thing to mock. We'll belittle, we'll pressure, we'll make fun of, we'll tell you you're not good enough. Well, all they had to do was ask me. I can tell them I'm not good enough. Well, you don't have the money. You could have asked me. I mean, how is North Liberty Baptist Church? It starts off in this little office space. How are you ever going to get a different building? You guys don't have any money. I know. 2 problems of a church plant, Brother Caleb. No money and no people. Outside of that, it's great. No money, no people. Well, how are you going to take that little group and that little space, and how are you going to afford that? Well, we've got broken people here. We've got inadequate in our own hands. We have inadequate supplies. We have people who have been hurting. We don't have great leaders, and we don't have great experience, and we don't have anybody that joined our church when there were 8 of us that had built up 19 churches and had all the experience. No. It was just people on our knees saying, God, we don't know what we're doing either. And yet the enemy will say, it's not going to work. How can you do that? Are you sure you can afford this? Are you sure that you're able to reach this? Are you sure you're able to accomplish that? Are you sure you'll be able to do that? And all along there's the mocking, but then the fear comes. Oh, you don't want to get yourself in a spot where you can't. What they don't realize is it's not my work and it's not your work. It's God's work. And this is what he turned and he told them during this time. And when they were struggling, this fear came in. Well, how did they respond to this? They responded, look at verse number 14. I looked and rose up after 10 times of this threat. I looked and rose up and said to the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, be not ye afraid of them. Well, why do you think he said that? Because he saw the impact of these threats among the people. Fear. And so he stands up and he says, be not afraid of them. And then he gives them a challenge. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your houses. He says, don't be afraid. Remember who's on our side. Stay busy, keep fighting, stay focused, do the work that God has called you to do, but don't quit because of fear. Don't quit because of fear. So, plans of the enemy. First, there was mocking. Then there is fear. The third plan is, I'm going to call this fleshly worries. You could say economic troubles. Look what happens. The longer they're there working, the people start in this moment of maybe fear. They are figuring out how they're supposed to supply their own needs. You see, where they came from, they had houses. Where they came from, they had land. Where they came from, there was food. And now they've come here and they're working day in and day out, and they don't have a house. They have one, but it's back there. Well, they're not getting paid for this, so how are they supposed to afford that house? How are they supposed to keep that payment going? And so chapter 5, here's what happens. There was a great cry of the people and of their wives, that's another message, against their brethren. I'll let Brother Petty preach that one. And against their brethren of the Jews. So now they're not just fighting. Notice who they're fighting with. The people they're fighting with are the Jews who stayed back. Their own people. For there were, notice what happens, verse 2, for there were that said, we, our sons and our daughters are many, therefore we take up corn for them that we may eat and live. Some also there were that said, we have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses that we might buy corn because of the dearth. So they start borrowing money from the people who have stayed back, mortgaging out their properties, mortgaging out their things so that they can have food to eat over here. And now they're finding themselves in a bind because they can't pay that mortgage off. And they can't borrow on it again. And so they're hungry, they need food, they've borrowed, they've mortgaged their house, they've mortgaged all these things. And then verse 4, there were also that said, we have borrowed money for the king's tribute. Not only have they borrowed from Jews, now they're borrowing from what they owe the government. So he goes on, and that upon our lands and vineyards, yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. And here's what he's saying, we owe the government just like a non-Jew. We found ourselves owing them as if we were not Jewish, as if we were not separate, but now we're mixed in with this. And lo, we bring into bondage. I can't pay it. Who are they going to go after? Our sons and our daughters to be servants. And some of our daughters are brought into bondage already. I mean, this is a major problem. Would you not agree? And in this moment of fear and worry, how is God going to meet our needs? How is God going to take care of us? Let's do this and let's do this. Everything in their own power, and they find themselves causing their own children to be servants to government. And certainly a mess. Verse number, let's see here, let's go. We got to move through this. I have 2 more messages to preach. Yeah, I didn't hear any amens that time, Brother Caleb. Verse 5. He goes on and talks about this, and then he says this at the end of the verse, neither is it in our power to redeem them. We don't have any way to set them free. For other men have our lands and our vineyards. So we mortgaged out the land to this person so we could get some food, and then we let our children to be servants for a little bit of money here. The problem is now we're out of money and we don't have a land that we can use to get our children back. They're in a bind. Fleshly worries, the economic scares. We don't have food, we don't have money, we owe money. How are we going to get out of this? What are we going to do? Well, they responded with, in verse number 7, as they tell this to Nehemiah, here's their response. Some good old-fashioned preaching. Can I get an amen right there? Verse 7, he says, then I consulted with myself. I love that phrase. I do that a lot. And I rebuked the nobles. He recognizes this is not the time earlier when they were a little afraid. That was the time to say, be not afraid, remember God. But now they have taken it too far, and he stands and he rebukes them. He says, I rebuked the nobles and the rulers and said to them, ye exact usury every one of his brother, and I set a great assembly against them. And I said unto them, we after our ability have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold unto the heathen, and will ye even sell your brethren, or shall they be sold unto us? Then held they their peace and found nothing to answer. He stands and rebukes them for the condition, the situation that they've got themselves in. We look at verse number 9. Also I said, that's a good preaching point. Just extend that message a little bit. It is not good that ye do. Ought ye not to walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the heathen, our enemies? You are more afraid of them than you are being afraid to be out of the will of God. You're more afraid of what they will do to you than what God can do to you. Now, the reason this is important is the reason this city is torn down is because they got away from God. The reason they were in bondage is because they got away from God. The reason Nehemiah is serving a worldly king is because God's people were not following God. He says, and now already you're going to fear them more than you fear God. Look what God can do to us. Fleshly worries. Well, verse number 16, if you want, for fun's sake, later you can read verse 10, 13, 14, 15. He deals with them getting away from owing the government. Verse number 16, yea, also I continued. Here's their response. They had a little slip up, but they're back. I continued in the work of this wall. Neither bought we any land, and all my servants were gathered thither unto the work. Here's their response. Repentance to the work. Let's repent and let's keep going. We were wrong, but let's not quit. It was a bad decision, but there's still a work to do. So one of the distractions of the enemy is there's several in this. He points out our economic situation. He brings up our guilt. He brings up our bad decisions. He allows us to feel like we can't do anything and there's nothing we can do and we can't go on and all is hopeless and we're just going to have to deal with it. And he turns around and he says, remember who it is you're serving. There is a God who has called you to this, and if it is God who has called you this, then get to it. Repent and keep doing the work. And that's exactly what they did. And thank the Lord for it. The fourth plan of the enemy to get you to quit is to compromise through conversations. Chapter number 6, we then come to chapter number 6. And we see it came to pass, chapter number 6, verse 1, when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arabian, the rest of our enemies, heard that I had builded the wall and that there was no breach left therein, there's nowhere for them to attack, they never did attack. Though at that time I had not set up the doors upon the gates, that Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, so now they're wanting to have a little talk. Come and let us meet together in some one of the villages in the plain of Ono, and they thought to do me mischief. And I sent messages unto them saying, I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and come down to you? So the fourth tool of the enemy to get us to quit is to compromise through conversation. Just come down and let's talk about it. Let's find common ground. Let's just find some areas that you can give a little and we can give a little. And here's the point, and I'm sure we'll hear this again. But the point is this, the enemy is not necessarily interested in hurting you. They just want the work to stop. If they can just stop the work, that's what they want. They're not interested in a battle. They want the work to stop. That's why they mocked, to stop the work. That's why they sent fear, to stop the work. That's why the enemy got them in this situation. And I guarantee the government over there thought, oh yes, yeah, we'll lend you some money. We'll let you become our servants. Absolutely. Knowing they could use it against them. So they tried to get them to compromise through conversation. Well, look how they responded in verse number 4. Yet they sinned unto me 4 times. He answered in verse number 3, Why should I do this? In verse 4, he says, yet thou sin unto me 4 times after this sort, and I answered them after the same manner. No. I'm not going to have this conversation. And they sin again. Oh, come on, let's just talk about it. No. We really should find some common ground. Maybe we can find peace and we'll let you have some and we'll take some. No. 4 times it says he came back wanting to get this compromise through conversation, and they had to say no every time. Well, thank the Lord, through Nehemiah up to this point, the tools of the enemy to get them to quit did not work. So that's message 1, 4 plans of the enemy to get you to quit. Message number 2, all God's people said, lessons learned about the work of God. This should be a short message, but the last one should have 2. Lessons learned about the work of God. Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 3, he makes some great statements. And I sent messengers unto them, saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and come down to you? Lessons learned about the work of God. Nehemiah learned some lessons about this through all the difficulties, through the enemy, through the distractions, through all of these efforts to get the work to stop. He learned something about God's work. The first thing he learned is this: it is a great work. It's a great work. That's what he says. I mean, it's pretty simple, but that's what he says. I am doing a great work. You underestimate the value of the work we are doing. You think this is just a city. You think these are just walls. And I'm telling you, it's not just a city and it's not just walls. It is the work of God. And when it is the work of God, it is a great work. And so he was trying to let them know, you want me to stop, but what you fail to understand is this is a great work. The work is great. The cause is great. The mission is great. The potential is great. Nehemiah had learned that the work is great. Many times he stood alone against his own people and had to rebuke them and stand against them because the work was great. He encouraged others to come along and to help. Why? Because the work is great. He had stood his ground because he knew the work was great. It's not just a wall. It's not just a city. It is the work of God. And don't let anybody ever convince you that anything of God is just anything. It is a great work. Well, how's your marriage? If things aren't good in your marriage, just this. No, it is a great work. A marriage is worth something. It's not just a relationship. It is a marriage given by God and our family and our church. And we could go on down the list. If it is a work of God, it is a great work. The other lesson I think that Nehemiah learned is I cannot stop working. I personally cannot stop. He says in the verse, he says, I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down. I cannot stop. Nehemiah knew that he needed it. Nehemiah needed the work. Nehemiah needed to stay busy. Nehemiah needed to not get distracted. Nehemiah needed not to get discouraged. Nehemiah needed to not be tempted by the compromising words. Nehemiah needed to keep going. I cannot stop working. Not only did Nehemiah need it, but he knew the others that were following him needed it. And can I say, when it comes to the things of God, you need it. But not only do you need it, your children need it, your family needs it, everyone around you needs it. It is a great work, and I cannot stop because we need it. I need to stay faithful. I need to keep going. I need to stay obedient. I need to stay true to what God has asked. The reason they were in captivity was not because the work of God was not great. The reason they were in captivity is because the people of God quit working. They quit serving God. They stopped following God. They stopped listening to God's people. And now he stands repairing the damage of what happened last time they stopped. And he stands and says, I cannot come down. I'm not going to go through this again. I'm not going to experience this defeat again. I am not going to go through it again. I cannot come down. Nehemiah had learned, I cannot stop. Wouldn't it be great if God's people learned that? I can't stop. I cannot quit. For myself, I cannot stop doing the things of God. Why? Because I know me. I can't take 2 days and not read my Bible. You want to know why? Because for me, it'll turn into 7. I know that about me. I can't take a couple days and not think about the things of God. And I can't take a couple days and get away from my prayer life. Why? Because I know me. I cannot stop, or it will end up being a disaster spiritually for me. Most people who are Christians who end up in deep sin didn't start just overnight into deep sin. It starts with these steps of getting away from this, and next thing we know, it's failure. It's a great fall of a wall. So the lesson 2 from Nehemiah is I cannot stop working. Lesson 3, I believe Nehemiah learned, is the work cannot cease. The work cannot stop. That's what he says in verse number 3. I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it? If I go, the work stops. And the work cannot cease. The work cannot stop. There is great risk that it will not start up again. You say, well, I don't think that's true. Really, how many times have you started your Bible reading? How many times have you started a prayer life? Well, why did it quit? Well, it started with one day. The work stopped one day. And next thing you know, there's a message on Read Your Bible, and you're down in an altar saying, God, help me and forgive me for that last time, and I'm going to start over, and I'm going to do it this time. And thank God that He is forgiving and that we can do that. Thank God for that. But wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to? If the work just did not stop, it kept going and kept going. And I understand there's little distractions along the way and things, we're waiting for God's timing on everything, and God puts things in place, but the work cannot stop. It cannot stop. There's a great risk, not only that it will not start up again, but there's a great risk that it will lose its priority in the hearts of people. If you stop a work, there's a risk that it loses its place of priority. It loses its value in your heart. It is great to do the work of God, but it is greater to do the work of God with passion. It is great to reach out to others, but it is even greater to reach to others with passion. It is great to read our Bible, but it is better to read with passion because we want to, because the work is great and because I cannot stop and the work cannot cease. We must keep going and keep going and keep going. Why? Because the work is not finished. The work cannot cease. Here's what Nehemiah knew. Nehemiah knew that there's a lot that will happen inside these walls. God will help a lot of people inside these walls. Lives will be protected inside these walls. Lives will be safe inside these walls. People will grow inside these walls. People will be fed inside these walls. And understanding all that can take place inside these walls, he says the work cannot cease. And I would say, what can God do in our life if the work never stops? And if we see that, then we would say, like Nehemiah, the work cannot cease. Nehemiah had seen the value of the work continuing, and he knew the work could not stop. That's message number 2. Message number 3. Everybody doing okay? Amen. All right. I expect 3 love offerings tonight. The laughter was like, he thinks he's getting 1. Message 3. This is where Brother Art and I had a fun little, southern moment here. 3 times to tell the enemy, we ain't coming. We ain't coming. Is that not what happened in verse 3 and 4 of chapter 6? We're not coming. Over and over, I sent messages on them saying, I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and come down to you? Yet they sent unto me 4 times after the sword, and I answered them after the same manner. In other words, they said, come on down. No, we ain't coming. Come on down and talk to us. No, we're not coming. Come on down, just let's have a talk. Let's meet in the city of Oh No. First of all, don't ever meet in a city of Oh No. We are not coming. We're not interested. We're not coming down. We're not going to where you want to be. Well, this is a fun message for me because there are a lot of times we need to tell the world, we ain't coming. There's a lot of times we have to tell the devil, we ain't coming. We have to tell sometimes our own family members, we're not coming. So 3 times, this is the 3rd message, 3 times to tell the enemy, we ain't coming. Any grammar majors in here tonight? All right, just bear with me. 3 times to tell the enemy, we ain't coming. Number 1, anything that pulls us away from the work of God. Anything that pulls us from the work of God, we ain't coming. It may not even be something bad. Don't miss this. There may be nothing wrong with what is taking place. That is not what is wrong. What is wrong is it takes us from the work of God. And the work stops, and I stop, and the habits stop, and the routine stops, and I get away, and it loses its priority in my heart, and there's a distraction that is there. And so anything that the enemy sends my way that pulls me away from the work of God, I have to say, I ain't coming. I am not going. It may be just for a moment. It's not a big deal. It's just for a brief time. No, I'm not coming down. It's just a talk. I just want to talk to you. No, I have no interest. I'm not interested in stopping the work of God. And so if what is asked of me causes me to stop the work of God, then I have to say I'm not coming. Oh, you can go back and do that later? It's just one time? No, we ain't coming. Just come and talk with us, and then we'll let you get back to work, and we'll leave you alone for the next 3 years. If you'll just come and talk to us, Brother Don, then for 3 years we won't go to war. We'll leave you alone. No. Oh, that's a great deal. You should take it. No. Why? Because it pulls us away from the work of God. It doesn't matter if it's a short time. It doesn't matter if it's temporary. It pulls us from the work of God, and therefore we have to say, I ain't going. We ain't coming. Number 2, when we say that we ain't coming, telling the enemy, anything that originates outside of God. You see, God had given them a plan. And God never instructed them to go speak with Sanballat and Tobiah. God never told them to go work it out. God never gave them instructions to make peace. God never gave them the instructions to try to work it out where everybody can just be happy and get along. God never gave them instructions. Nehemiah knew exactly what God asked him to do. So he says, I ain't coming. We ain't coming. Why? Because the plan originated outside of God. God's plan was not to meet the enemy. God's plan was not to have a discussion. God's plan was not to find common ground. Well, what was God's plan? Build the wall. So what are we going to do? We're going to keep building the wall. Well, come down and talk. Well, I can't go down there and talk and build the wall at the same time. Matter of fact, they believed so much to this that the Bible tells us at one point when they knew the enemy was coming, they stood with their swords in one hand and a trowel in another so they could keep going and fight at the same time. They can fight and keep working at the same time, but they cannot leave and go talk to somebody and keep working at the same time. So they said, no, we ain't coming. It did not originate with God. This is not God's leading. This is not God's instructions. These are not God's instructions. Therefore, we are not going. In my Bible reading, I'm reading recently of all we know is he's called a man of God. We don't even know his name. He goes and he deals with the king there, and the Lord uses him to destroy their altar, and there's a big mess. Well, then he leaves. Well, they send somebody that says, hey, you're supposed to come eat with us. But God had told the person, don't eat or drink with them. And here's what the person said, we are of God too. We are a believer in God. I am a prophet as well. And so here's what he did. He got up and he went and ate and drank with them directly against the word of God because he was deceived into thinking it would be okay. You know what happened? He should have said, you might be a prophet, but that didn't originate with God. God didn't tell me to go eat with you. God didn't say to go there. Matter of fact, he told me the direct opposite. He said, don't go. And as a result, when he left, a lion met him there and killed him. And all of the fame of that went about, and they saw God's judgment. Why? Because he stopped for a moment to do something that did not originate with God. The sad part of that story is he was doing so well up to that point. He went and confronted them in front of everybody, risking his own life, and then fail one time because he did what God did not ask him to do. Anything that originates outside of God. Number 3 of message 3. times to tell the enemy we ain't coming. Number 3, anything that requires compromise. Anything that requires compromise, we ain't coming. In our text in verse number 2, Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, Come, let us meet together in some one of the villages of the plain of Ono. They didn't even ask him to come all the way back and meet him in their homes. He said, let's meet somewhere in the middle. Let's just find a common ground. Well, I think it would be safe for us to say that for myself, and I probably speak for you as well, we are not interested in compromise. That is not who we are as a church, and that is not who we are as individuals. I have no desire, please hear this, I am not interested in having things in common with my enemy. That is not a desire of mine. That is not a passion of mine. I don't lie there at night thinking, how can I have more in common with the people who want to destroy me? That is not on my mind. I have no interest in compromise. And if you think that those who try to get you to change a little here and change a little there and compromise, they will not be happy with one change. Next it is another change, and it is another change, and it is another change. And they hate the words. It's a slippery slope, but it is a slippery slope. Indeed, a cliff. It is sharp. It falls fast. I'm not interested in having a discussion with the enemy. I'm not interested in having a discussion. I am not interested in satisfying the enemy's wishes so that they can be happier about me. I am not here to please the enemy. I am here to please God. If it requires compromise, tell them we ain't coming. We ain't coming. Oh, North Liberty Baptist Church, you guys should really try this. We ain't coming. You guys should really think about doing this more often. We ain't coming. If it pulls us away from the work, if it originates outside of God, and if it requires compromise, then we are not going. We're staying right here. And that's what Nehemiah said. So 3 messages from the experience of Nehemiah. 4 plans of the enemy to get you to quit. He does want you to quit. And then we see lessons learned about the work of God. It's a great work. I need it. The work needs it. And then we see 3 times to tell the enemy we ain't coming. If it pulls us away from the work of God, if it requires compromise, if it originates outside of God, then we're not going. Isn't it amazing how much Nehemiah learned through these battles of life? But hear this, if he would have quit at the mocking, he would have never learned all these other valuable lessons. Each one of these were an opportunity for his faith in God to grow. If it would have started with, let's just talk about it, who knows? But as it grew, he learned these people are not on my side. There is nothing good that can come from talking to them. Remember, these are the ones that were going to sneak in and kill us. These are the ones who made fun of us, and now they're talking nice and wanting to have a conversation? I don't think so. He learned from it. And I would say the same is true for us. As we live the Christian life and we stand firm and we stay focused, we learn the value of staying faithful. Just stay faithful. That's about it.